We're a little late. That's okay. It's my first time giving this, so I may go fast, I may go slow, I may demo the whole time. We'll just see what happens. So this is Drupal 8 page management stuff. I haven't really given a session like this since about DrupalCon Munich, mostly because we started doing more code freezy sort of stuff and trying to introduce fewer changes into core. Luckily, this is all about contrib, so I get to talk about whatever I like. A little bit about me. My name is Chris Vanderwater. I am a technical specialist with Acquia. I am the Drupal 8 Scotch Initiative owner, which basically means that I get to go, hey, I think we should do this. I am Eclipse GC on Twitter, a co-maintainer for Chaos Tools, and have a couple of things of my own that you have probably never used. So I like to do all of my sessions in the format of tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then tell you what I told you. So we are going to talk about a whole bunch of topics, and I want to kind of do this in maybe a more of a core conversation sort of forum. So if you all have questions, I'll repeat it for the mic, and I'll do my best to give answers where possible. So please feel free to be very engaged in terms of interruptions and things like that. We're going to talk about, first and foremost, all the things that Drupal 8 has actually inherited from CTools. If you've been a heavy user of anything in the CTools stack, then this will be of great interest to you. We're also going to talk about the various things that are still in CTools and didn't make it into core, maybe some new things that are coming down the pipe, stuff like that. We also want to talk about the current status of PageManager, which is heavily in flux even as of right this moment. And talk a bit about its future plans, and then, as you might guess, the exact same two things for panels. And we can get into some other topics as they relate to panels as we go on from there. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about CTools. Who in here has ever actively used the CTools APIs? Great. Awesome. So, let's talk about a few of those. Anybody manually use the object cache ever? Yeah? Okay. So object cache is in core now, which is fantastic. It has some really great additional support elements that came along with it. It became a new portion of core that we call temp store. It's pretty much the exact same thing it was in CTools. It's just been cleaned up and OOified. It stores values between CGI bootstraps, for those of you who don't know what it does. So a really great example of this would be something like views. You know, when you're in views and if you don't have Ajax turned on, views UI still continues to function in some manner. And the way it does this is it'll actually store the values that you are giving it from one page reload to the next. So even though you're really? Google Drive? Really? Excuse me momentarily. Oh well, whatever. So even if your page is completely reloading and CGI is totally going down and coming back up, you still have all your values because it's temporarily storing them in a serialized format in the database. Who has used export? There's a lot of hands. There's like most of the hands. So export is a big topic. That actually started off in views. Like I believe the first actual exports of any sort were coming out of views, and CCK sort of followed suit shortly thereafter. But CTools ultimately kind of took all of that and made an API out of it. And then modules like features began to leverage it and introduce some of their own types of exports. And all of this became, the kind of evidence for needing CMI in core. And so CTools export is really a very, very close analog for what became configuration management. So all the YAML files that, you can take from an existing Drupal 8 site and put into another Drupal 8 site, this logic and a lot of it all kind of came out of what CTools export was doing. Yeah, so it's a separate storage mechanism from the content. If you've done export, as many of you have, you'll know that these are things that usually contain a machine name and some sort of configuration that you're going to then inject into maybe plugins or something like that. And that continues to be very relevant and true in Drupal 8. They're used just about everywhere in Drupal 8 core. So you're going to want to get familiar with this API very quickly if this is something that you have had need of in the past. And it's very easy to use. I would argue that it is actually easier to use in Drupal 8 core than it ever was in CTools. So it's a really big win in those regards. And every settings form in core actually makes use of this. So if you have a setting anywhere in the system, it's going to get an export associated with it. So, the site's actual settings, what the site name is, who the administrative email should be, all of that sort of stuff, all actually exportable in this same sort of methodology. And again, if you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand. Yeah?
So when you're doing config set before it even makes the YAML files, it's calling this export?
I'm saying export became CMI.
Okay. All right.
Right. So yeah, when you say, oh, I've got a new config object and I'm going to add some values to it, and then you save it as a particular name, that's all kind of the analog to CTools export. Welcome. Export UI. If you used export, I hope you used export UI. Yeah? So export UI has a slightly different use case than maybe some of what I talked about. If I'm saying, hey, the name of your site and the actual administrative person to email are all stored in config, that's a really different thing than being able to say, oh, I want a view that's configured this way, and I want another view that's configured this way, and I want panels that are configured this way. And these are the notions of export UI, where it says you have a repeatable thing that's going to need exporting and importing, and it represents multiple configurations of roughly the same sort of subsystem. And that became config entities in Drupal 8. How many people in here have actually done any D8 yet? A good chunk of the room, most of the room. So I'm telling you stuff you probably already know. Awesome. We'll fly through most of this then and get to various other things. So as I said, repeatable CMI configurations used in core, blocks, views, again, just about everywhere. Plugins. Anybody use Drupal 8 plugins yet? Yeah? Okay. There are about 40 different plugin types just in Drupal core. And these range all sorts of different things, including views and blocks and conditions and input filters. All sorts of things are actually pluggable and represented by the plugin system in core. Yeah?
So even since entities have been moved out of the plugins directory, but it still has annotations at the top of entities, are they still actually plugins or not?
They are plugins in terms of the fact that they're using a lot of the same underlying architecture.
Okay.
They don't necessarily conform to the same sort of specification that we hold traditional plugins to.
Okay.
There was a statement made by Earl Miles about halfway through the Drupal 8 cycle of, well, entities shouldn't be plugins, their storage controllers should be plugins. And that is almost certainly true. We didn't end up going that route. And entities are especially weird because there's a single class that backs all the bundles of one content entity, instead of maybe having a class per bundle, which is more what you would see in a traditional plugin setup.
Because I didn't know if it was moved out of the plugins directory just as a clarification, or make it seem simpler, or but you're saying there are major differences between them and the other plugins that you would find under the plugins directory above.
Right, so the plugins directory is totally informal.
Okay.
That's just something that most of the plugins in core actually adopted. If you were to implement your own plugin type, you could specify the directory structure within the namespace that it should be looking for. Entities does this and says that it is simply entity instead of plugin entity.
Okay. All right.
If that answers your question more directly.
So there might be some plugins I'm seeing in core that aren't necessarily in the plugins directory.
Yeah, a great example of this would be every menu YAML file.
Okay.
Every single menu YAML file actually represents plugin definitions.
Okay.
which most people don't realize, but they do. So, more questions on that topic? I thought I saw a hand over here earlier. No? Okay. Ajax and Modal. This went pretty much entirely into core. There's a really great modal dialogue system in core now that's awesome. If you haven't used it, I would suggest giving it a try because it's great. Content type plugins became core blocks. Access plugins became conditions. And there are a lot of other kind of miscellaneous sort of things that were in CTools that were nice helper sort of stuff. And a huge, huge amount of that stuff has actually moved into Drupal core at this point. So we've, for many years now, kind of talked about CTools as being the, the testing ground for what we think core should be doing. And the 7 to 8x cycle has been a really great proof of just exactly how true that can be, because probably 80+% of what we had going on in CTools made its way into core. So, knowing where we've been, let's talk a little bit about where we're going. CTools right now has a number of things kind of going on in it, and there are various statuses of these. So we have a number of different utilities that we're actually building that are all kind of in development. Let's see. So we have a number of different abstract classes that are there to simplify certain workflows that you might have. So anybody use PageManager in Drupal 7? Probably a lot of you, considering the session that this is. You know how you have like the access conditions and selection criteria pages, and they're roughly the exact same page. And if you were to actually dig into PageManager in Drupal 7 and try to find those pages and figure out like, oh, I could really use this same sort of thing in my module over here, you would find that that's very difficult to do. And Drupal 8 CTools actually has 3 abstract classes that you just extend and implement a couple of methods, and you can have this functionality in your module for your user interface. And it's almost identical visually to what was happening in CTools in 7x for things like PageManager, but you can just kind of use it in your module. And I'll be happy to show a demo of that in a module where I bet you don't expect it to be. We also have this notion of derivatives. I'll explain derivatives real quick for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Plugins in Drupal 8 largely replaced info hooks. Info hooks were PHP, which meant you could do for each statements in them. Most of the plugins moved over to things like YAML or annotations in Drupal 8, which, surprise, surprise, you can't do a for each statement in. So a derivative class is just a class that iterates over an annotation and allows you to do something like parse every single entity type in the system and make all entity types available through the same plugin. So if you wanted to do something like, I don't know, maybe serialize every plugin type as JSON and ship it out across a services API, you could do that with one plugin and one derivative. And so because entities are such a big thing in Drupal 8, we actually ship a helper class to just do most of that for you, and you can extend it, add a small amount of logic that's specific to your needs, and then boom, you have a new plugin that can iterate over every single entity type in the entire system and make use of the data therein. And there are probably more of these sorts of utilities that will show up over time as PageManager specifically and panels as well, a little tangentially, are being developed. We're finding more and more things where we're like, oh, well, we could use that over in this module, and we could use that over in this module, and those things will make their way back to CTools, and hopefully core. One of the things that didn't make it into core is the wizard, which I am still kind of heartbroken about, but it means we get to iterate on it and make it as good as we possibly can during this cycle. So has anybody ever implemented CTools Wizard? No. I hope that the next time I ask that question, maybe a year from now, everybody's hands raised, because it's really easy.
I did it.
Oh, okay. I have one hand raised. Awesome. So it's really easy in Drupal 8. I'd be happy to show a little bit of that once we get kind of through the slides here. But I would consider this to be fairly stable at this point. We still have a couple of bugs here and there probably, but in general it works, and it works very, very well. It uses the temp store stuff that we talked about earlier to actually save values from one step to the next. So it's actually sort of ironic that temp store made it into core and Wizard did not, because the primary use case for every Wizard and all of any CTools implementation anywhere ran through what we call temp store today. But at least the foundational components of that made it really easy for us. Currently, it supports the ability to build just custom one-off forms that you might save to a config object somewhere. It also supports the ability to do config entities. So it has built-in support to make it easier for you to actually take something that is considered a configurable entity and break it up over multiple steps, which is really nice if you need one step to depend upon information that was submitted in a previous step and it conditionally changes based upon that. Questions? Oh, and in the future, I would very much like to support content entities. I think it'd be really, really cool if we could do something like Core has this notion of form modes now, and in a form mode you can actually like hide fields and show fields and do all sorts of stuff. And it'd be really cool if you could just make a bunch of form modes and then have a content entity that strung them all together, or a content entity wizard that strung them all together into a series of steps. I think that that could make for some really great workflows for certain especially complicated nodes or something like that. Chances are all of us have built a node with way too many fields before because we had an awful lot of stuff that we needed to collect from a user. And sometimes that was conditional and sometimes it wasn't. And maybe, there were entity references on it that needed to limit themselves by some other reference that was put in the form earlier. And you could actually begin to get at and do those sorts of things in a multi-step sort of approach to content entities. This is on the list of really desirable things, and I think that it is very, very possible and plausible. We haven't tried to build a base class that you can just extend and do it yet, because there's some interesting logic that we have to get around there, and we don't need it right now. But if you do need it and you want help implementing it, please find me on IRC or Twitter or something, and I will help point you in the right direction. Going to get into a couple of things I'd really like to see in CTools in the near-term future. Since everybody in here pretty much has used Drupal 8, I'm going to ask a really serious question. Has anybody installed rules for Drupal 8 yet? Okay. Did you visit the block page after you did so?
Yeah, because I was doing a block.
Was it horribly broken?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, core block visibility conditions are horribly broken. And this is just one of those things that we couldn't get it to the state that we really needed to get it to during the core cycle. Rules in particular absolutely shatters this core interface in such a way as to make any block placement that happens after you install rules completely worthless. You can't use your blocks at all from that point forward. Blocks that were configured beforehand will all continue to work, but you can't go edit them, and you can't add new ones. Don't try. Turn rules off, then go do it, then turn rules back on, or something horrible like that, which will delete all of your rules configuration, so you'll want to export that first. We should absolutely be leveraging the wizard that we already have in CTools. And some of the utilities there so that we can do better block configurations, because if we were using, the condition wizard stuff I was talking about earlier, we wouldn't have any of these problems because it doesn't make the same sort of assumptions core does. And this is actually probably a pretty easy module to write. I've given it a little bit of test code just to see how hard it would be. And since I don't need it right now, it hasn't happened, but it will happen. So it's worth mentioning. Questions at all? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. Do you know if the rules people are planning to just do a hook form alt or something and remove their rules from the blocks page?
I do not know.
Okay.
I kind of hope I write this module and rules becomes dependent upon CTools. That'd be awesome. Okay. I don't see it happening, but has anybody ever used the custom condition rule sets module in CTools in Drupal 7? Two people? Has anybody ever used rules? Okay. Have you used the custom rule sets in rules? Yeah? Same thing. Different plugins. which luckily enough in Drupal 8, same thing, same plugins. So I'm really excited about that fact. I actually have this code mostly written and need to commit it. In fact, I promised to commit it months ago and didn't. So shame on me. But it's in dev right now. It allows for a condition that executes other conditions. So you actually have kind of a wizarded approach where you can set up a bunch of conditions, and whether they're anded together or ORed together, and then based upon that logic, we can figure out what sort of context this condition actually needs to execute those conditions, and suddenly you have a condition that executes conditions. Welcome to condition inception. Yes, that's all I said there. And various other things, obviously, to be determined. My simple statement here is that we don't promise to not write more things that we think core should have done. We will likely continue to write things that we think core should have done because it was very beneficial for us in the last cycle. And if we can do more of that, we think that it will be beneficial for everyone else because developing for Drupal 8 is actually pretty great. Questions before I move out of CTools and on to the next topic? No? Okay. So let's talk about the current state of PageManager in Drupal 8. PageManager is actually in an alpha status right now, which is a little deceptive because we've had pretty usable alphas. The problem, of course, is that we've been talking for quite a while, and we've finally come to the conclusion that we really do need to re-architect the storage that underlies it. So if you're currently using it, I'm sorry, we're about to break it. Maybe today. Maybe. But it'll be very good for all of us, I think, in the long term. Today we have custom response code handling that's kind of very alpha-y. Long term, I think we're going to do a lot of really cool things with that. Hopefully get back to being able to do tokenized 301s and those sort of things. Has anybody ever used this functionality in 7? Oh, handful of people. Great. For those of you who haven't, I have like an example of stuff that I've done with it in the past. I used to work for Commerce Guys before I worked for Acquia, and we used to maintain 2 separate sites. We maintained an English language site and a French language site. And the French language site had a lot less content on it, so at some point we actually took that content and wanted to merge it into the English language site. And so you had all these blog posts that showed up at commerceguys.com/fr/something, right? And we didn't want to lose any of the SEO that we had attached to those. So what I ended up doing when we imported all that stuff in was I said, oh, well, we're doing fr.commerceguys.com now. So if a request comes in to fr/anything, I put a PageManager page there, and I told it 301 redirect to fr.commerceguys.com/whatever that string was. And magically, with one little PageManager page, I took care of all of that. Yes, I'm aware I could have done that in htaccess, but I didn't have access to the server, and this made me look like a magician. So you can look like a magician too if you happen to have any Drupal 7 sites that need something like this. It's very beneficial. The only things I think Drupal 7 supports are 403s, 404s, and 301s. It's kind of cool to be able to do a manual 403 or 404 if you need to. In Drupal 8, we will likely support every response code under the sun. There might even be a little teapot in there somewhere.
That's what I was about to ask, so.
Yes. PageManager in Drupal 8 also has a really simple layout tool for block placement. Right now it has 2 regions, it's top and bottom, and it's really just kind of proof of concept, like, look, Ma, we can do block placement. Panels actually inherits from this right now, but we'll get to that in a minute. We are laying the groundwork for panels here, and I think we're actually coming along pretty well. It doesn't support route arguments if you don't specify that you need a route argument when you're creating it. So we obviously have a bug there. If you need route arguments, be sure you know that before you create the page, because right now we have a bug that won't find it after you've created the page. Questions? No? Okay, cool. Yeah. Future state of PageManager. I talked about the fact that we're re-architecting the storage for this, and the big point on this is that we're actually introducing a new type of entity, a new type of config entity that'll store the actual values for your individual variants. If you're familiar with exporting PageManager stuff in 7, you'll know that that's exactly how it works in 7. So if you override the node view page and you provide some custom node type, you can actually take the node view override for your custom node type and package it up into a feature along with your node type, and everything's great and fine. The Drupal 8 version of PageManager right now doesn't have a notion of these, but we are working very hard to get this done. David Snowpeck specifically is working very hard on this, as is Tim Plunkett. So a lot of good work going on this particular thing right here. You want to toss anything out there?
No, other than I share your hopes that we commit it today.
Me too. I share my own hope with that. That should be obvious based upon everything else I've said, that yes, these have their own CMI exports. And really what this is about is it's about a more granular separation of concerns. Currently, all of that information is inside of the page entity, so you have an awful lot of data all in one place that could and should be broken up. Then there's been a lot of time, especially over the course of the last 3 days, that has gone into figuring out whether or not we can take page variants and generate routes for each individual one of them. Again, a couple of shout outs here. Adam Fenneproxima over here helped write a little test for us to prove that it could be done, and Tim Plunkett has been working tirelessly for like the last 2-3 days on making that happen. He's not here. I suspect he's off making that happen right now. So what's really, really great about this is that if we pull this off, it means that Drupal's routing system is actually the one to figure out what variant we get, which is really cool. We benefit from a whole bunch of the caching elements that go along with that, as well as doing all of this work at a fairly low level. In fact, it turns out we're doing the work at a little bit too low of a level because some of the things we needed don't happen until later. So this is, I'm classifying this as experimental because we may get done with it and go, yay, it works, that was awful, and not do it. Or we may get done with it and go, yep, it's worth it, go. So I think that's kind of to be determined, but it's coming along, and I actually think we'll probably have an answer as to whether we're going to do it or not before we all leave bad camp. Then once these things are done, or not done, as the case may be, there's a user interface rebuild that we want to do, because if you've used PageManager in Drupal 8, what you'll find is that the user interface is totally different, and not necessarily in good ways. It is like a very lean sort of multi-page process. They're basically like 2 pages and a couple of modals. And it means that there's an awful lot of configuration sitting on a single page. And if you've ever done anything particularly advanced with PageManager, you'll know there are certain situations where like all your access controls just disappear because you're hijacking a page that's actually defined by core and not writing your own. Well, we can't really do that right now because all of it's on one page together, and without some really big like form access checks and stuff like that, which are awful and horrible and you should never do if you don't have to, we need to rebuild the user interface. And there's some good proof of concept work that I did a while back that uses CTools Wizard in order to actually stage this out across multiple pages. So once the variant entities land, we can actually seriously consider doing this, and hopefully we will. There's also this notion floating around of a complete ground-up rethink of the UX. And we're all kind of saying, let's get parity with Drupal 7 before we even consider such a thing. But so long as we're all happy with the underlying data structures, I think it could happen at any time during the 8x cycle. Questions before I move on? Yeah?
I may not be understanding something, but the route for variant that you're talking about there,
Yeah.
how would that interact with the idea of required context on
Yeah, so required context on a variant is...
Can you repeat his question?
Yeah. So the question was, how does having a route per variant interact with having required contexts on a variant? And so a required context, there are a number of different ways that statement gets used occasionally. So I'll start at the bottom and work my way up really quickly. You're likely to have blocks, and you're likely to have conditions that you might use, like in, say, maybe a panels layout or something like that. And those may require a node or a term or something that they need to evaluate in order to either, determine whether the condition is true or false, or render some field of that node, something along these lines. And once you've got that, you have to pass that all the way up. Well, that's actually why PageManager does it the opposite way, and it says, tell me what you're going to have on your route, and I'll tell you what blocks or conditions you could use. So when we're defining the page, we define its path. And along with defining its path, if there are any, parameters in the route, we define what sort of thing it needs to be upcast into. Is this going to turn into a node? Is it going to turn into a term? What is it going to be? Users, whatever it might be. And by virtue of the fact that we know that, we can actually control what sort of blocks you can place. We can control what sort of conditions you can use. And you can arbitrarily add more contexts to the page, but that's all encapsulated in configuration. That configuration resides on each individual variant. So we can determine that stuff per variant, and thus per route. And so, in short, it doesn't affect it. So long as we dot our I's and cross our T's, everything should work fine there. Any other questions? Great. So let's talk about panels, which is what you're probably all here to actually talk about. Panels is in an alpha state, along with PageManager and CTools. Also, I didn't mention this, but we have synced alphas. So if you're looking at CTools and it says alpha 17, and you're looking at PageManager and it says alpha 17, and you're looking at panels and it says alpha 17, that wasn't a mistake. It was actually your suggestion, wasn't it?
I don't know if it was my suggestion. I've been the one enforcing it, but
David's been the one enforcing it, making sure we all actually tag and release together. But those are designed to work together. And when we were in beta, we were actually synced with the beta numbers too. So our alpha number was course beta number. Now we're still releasing alphas and we're in our Cs, so you kind of have to subtract the number of betas from our alpha to figure out what our C we correspond to. Although I will tell you I tested all of alpha 17 against our C2 today, and I don't think we need to re-roll anything, but whatever. We're not at the stage where we can change from alpha to beta though, so it will continue to be alpha numbers, I think. We haven't officially had that conversation, but odds are that's the case. Panels has a new dependency. In fact, we haven't broken the dependency on PageManager yet, have we?
yes, we did.
We did. Awesome. So we used to have a dependency on PageManager. We don't any longer. We do, however, have a dependency on Layout plugin. And Layout plugin is a generic layout tool for panels and display suite. So any layouts that get built, at least if we can all stay together on this, will work for panels or for display suite. And so a single library of layouts will work everywhere, which is really big. Yeah?
So is this like in D7 where panels is technically not dependent on PageManager, but if you want to do a lot of the stuff we traditionally think of with panels as far as like overriding a node page, you still need PageManager?
Yes, for that sort of stuff. You're not talking about layout plugin. You're asking, like, there's not a dependency on PageManager anymore. What does that mean?
Well, there's not a dependency in Drupal 7 either, right?
True.
But you usually would need it for what you want.
Right. So I'll actually get to that topic here in just a second. And if it's not clear at the end of that, ask again. Anyway, so layout plugins are really great. It means that you as developers can actually begin writing layout plugins anytime you please, and as we improve things, you'll be able to use them with us. And Display Suite actually already has a release going, so layout plugins should work there right now too. So lots of good stuff going on in that. Panels doesn't have any drag and drop yet. In fact, if you were to look at the interface that I was talking about earlier inside of PageManager, and you were to compare it to panels, they're virtually identical. And the reason for this is because we took the class that they both depended on and stuck them in CTools. It doesn't do this. That's wrong. I will change that slide. So future state of panels. We did that. My bad. So back to your question. I think we need a much greater focus on API and the UI. And so just like I was talking about earlier with like the conditions page and the ability for you to just like take that, make some very minor subclassing things to it and actually begin using it, I think for me personally, and I haven't run this past anybody else who's working with me right now, but for me personally, I think we should take panels and focus on it being a really strong page layout API with no assumptions about implementation, and a really strong set of abstract user interface classes that can be easily subclassed, have just a couple of things filled in, and they start magically working. Because that really begins to support the development of modules that use panels. And the three most common ones of those are Panelizer, Panels Everywhere, and Mini Panels. And if all of these have really thin subclasses on top of the Panels API, it becomes really easy to understand. Like you dig into Panels Everywhere today, and you're like, I don't know what's going on. Takes an awful lot of specialized effort and time to gain any sort of insight into what's going on in that world from a code perspective. And I think I'm probably not alone in feeling like it'd be nice to pull down that barrier and begin to push more people into understanding what's sitting there. And we can do that by really like lowering the barrier to entry on using the Panels API. So, in summary, the Chaos Tools system is fairly stable. We're doing various ongoing incremental changes, and we are going to add some new modules to that set of tools thus far. Let's see. PageManager, we hopefully will have a data storage re-architecture in the next 24 to 48 hours. Potential routing improvements, and it is still alpha software, and we do not promise that things won't change out from under you on it. So, honestly, kind of use at your own risk. Like, if you want to play with it right now, feel free. But I wouldn't go putting it in production. And finally, on panels, there's a lot to discuss, and I want to see us support lots and lots of other modules. So with that, I've got about 14 minutes for either questions or some demos of various things that maybe people found of interest. Are there any questions? Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to show something that I think is fun. All right, disclaimer. This is not bug-free code. Also, another disclaimer. This is just Chris doing something right now. I don't promise you're going to get it, okay? This is Path Auto. And I have had a dream for a while that Path Auto would do more than just nuance based upon the bundle. I feel like there's a lot of potential benefit to having smarter Path Auto alias capability, and I'm not alone in this. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new Path Auto pattern. And this is going to pop up, and it's going to begin to ask me a series of questions because I introduced a CTools dependency on Path Auto and built a wizard. So we'll create a demo, and I'm going to work against content, okay? Now, for those of you sharp-eyed enough to see it, you may see that content is in there twice. There are a couple things in there twice. That's because I am trying to throw away all the code that arbitrarily supported individual entity types in favor of a single plugin that supports all entity types with canonical URLs. So if any entity ever renders somewhere on something dedicated to it, I want the ability to give you the ability to hijack whatever the path alias of that thing is when it gets saved. So we're going to select the top content one because that's the one I care about. And I'm going to hit next on this. And the first thing that I hope you notice is this looks an awful lot like the condition UI. And it's funny that you should think that because That's exactly what it is. I have node bundle, current theme, and request path. 2 out of the 3 of those are insane for this use case. As I said, this is demo software, or pre-alpha dev something. And I'm going to configure this condition. So it's going to pop up, and it's going to be like, what kind of node types do you want? And I can easily tell it, hey, I want, actually, I'm going to tell it I want basic pages. And it'll go through, and it'll save that. And I can come back in, and I can edit that again. I can say, no, I actually meant articles. I can save that. And so as easily as that, I actually have a lot more nuanced control over what it is that I'm about to do. Now, I realize this is bundle, and you used to just have something that was segmented by bundle. But you can introduce new conditions to this system with a node context requirement, and they'll show up here. And you can evaluate that node and return true or false for that stuff. So, if we wanted to do like a content language, we could do that. If we wanted to figure out, whether the author was a member of a particular role, we could do that. And so all of a sudden, you get this really nuanced control over what sort of alias you're generating. Yes?
The context that PageManager is going to use or is using.
Same thing.
Is that the same context in the condition plugin is using? Like, it's a context of it? Okay.
Yes. It's the same all the way throughout the system, and it's a core Drupal 8 concept. So you can use it, core can use it, everyone can use it. Path Auto is using it in this case. So these are the very same context systems that PageManager is going to use, and hopefully rules, but I'm not involved with them. So yeah.
Is just not done that reason why, so it seems like core only declares the context of node and user and not say term or something else that.
Nope, core has all of those things.
How recently?
For a while. The reason that you think that, and it's a completely reasonable thing to think, is that there are only a handful of context providers. And these are classes that explicitly say, oh, there's something that happens where you could end up with a node, or there's something that happens where you could end up with a user.
Okay.
And there's not generic enough support in core to say, look at every route and figure out what sort of context you have on it.
Okay.
By the way, that class exists in PageManager, so PageManager can figure out what sort of context you have based upon the route that you are specifying you want to take over.
Right.
So if you want to take over the taxonomy term page, we don't have explicit support for it, but you can still do it.
So maybe what I read, and I was reading somewhere in core, and maybe what I read was the context provider. It only has 2 context providers.
Yeah, there are 3. There's node, user, and language.
Okay.
Yeah. So based upon this, I can hit the next page. And this next page is pretty straightforward. So I can do something like articles / and then I can browse the available tokens, and token module pops its thing up here. And I can then do, something semi-sane like that. And then I can hit finish. And yes, I have errors in my code, but you can see here's our demo down here. And if I were to edit this again, you're going to see everything still looks the same in the wizard from one step to the next. Cool? Cool. All right. So that's a very, very simple version of the same sort of user interfaces you've seen previously in PageManager. As I said, you can take over and use this stuff for yourself. I would really love to show people the code that runs a wizard. Is everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to come into PHP Storm here, and I have a million things open, so I apologize in advance. And you will do something like presentation mode, perhaps. Yay! And then I'm going to close most of this Path Auto stuff, and we're going to go to the pattern wizard. So the pattern wizard is an extension of the entity form wizard base class that, yeah, everyone can read that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me close that. Cool. And so it's going to ask for a couple things. These are all abstract methods on that base class. So you can't not fill them in. And the first thing they're going to ask is hey, what do you want the label for this thing to be? what do you want the machine label to be? What type of entity type are we dealing with? Okay, cool, great. And then it does this exists check, which I'm pretty sure I could actually get rid of. So I may try before the day's out, so that you don't have to implement that, because it's just looking for the entity class and then calls the static load method on it, which every entity has. So why do you need to tell me that? You don't. And then it says get operations. This is a wizard. The whole thing. That's all you need. And then you're building the individual steps. And the individual steps are really simple. So I can come into path auto pattern form here. And first thing I want you to see is that it extends form base. Every form in core extends form base. So do wizard steps. Okay? So nothing weird going on here. It also means you benefit from everything core can do on an individual step instead of on an individual form. And so I can specify, oh, this step needs to get these things out of the service container. So if you have various stateless services that you need in order to function on this step, you only have to specify it on the step that it matters for. And the wizard system will go and get it for you and inject it. It has a custom form ID, so you can form alter just this step, even though it appears on the same route as every other step. And then you're building the form. And so you have this build form method and a submit form method, and that's it. That's the first page where we told it what the machine name was, what the label was, and what type of content we were about to work with, content, users, terms, whatever, right? To go on to the next one here, I'll go ahead and show the selection criteria, because I think this is, again, something that's kind of worth showing. And there's a couple of little arcane things in this that you have to get used to, but again, it's a very small subset of things that you have to figure out how to implement. We're going to give it a form ID. We're going to tell it what conditions class. That's what popped up in the modal, right? There's got to be a form somewhere that handles that. And by the way, I have an abstract class you can extend and just add a couple of things to, and it'll work for this. So it's very low barrier to entry. An add route for in case Ajax isn't working. So this form works without JavaScript as well. Instead of opening a modal, it'll just go to the next page and then come back to the old page. A temp store ID. You have to tell me this because you had to tell the route system it to actually get the wizard working. It's a simple string that's unique to your use case. It's not hard. And then these three other methods, one has to do with routing information, one has to do with figuring out how to get the conditions out of whatever you're saving them in, and the other one is how to get any additional contexts out so that we can figure out what conditions you have access to. So it's all fairly low bar sort of stuff. Once you figure it out once, it'll be very easy to go forward with it. And I'd be happy to help anybody who might have an implementation they need to do on this now. So really easy stuff here. Questions?
Which version of Path Auto are you using? Is this 1xdev, right?
Of Path Auto?
Yeah.
It is a custom fork that I have that I'm trying to convince all interested parties we should do.
Okay, so it's not on GitHub or anything?
It is on GitHub.
Okay.
I made some changes today that aren't there yet. I'd be happy to push them and you can download and play.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the managed conditions, how you're using that. So all these steps, I want to figure it out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to help you out on that. So one more thing before I kind of bring this to a close. The only magic inside of any step of actually using the form wizard is actually these three lines. Can you all read those lines okay? So form state is really awesome in Drupal 8. It's an object that has all sorts of crazy stuff on it. But what it's got in this particular case is it has a temporary value on it. And most of the API that makes up Wizard is there to ensure that this temporary value is always available. And it's because I can't serialize this value because I have no clue what you're going to put into it. And you could put unsafe stuff into it. So I have to serialize it in a different way and store and restore it. And so this top line, cache values equal form state get temporary value wizard. Get temporary value wizard is magic, as you might imagine a wizard would be. And that's what you want. You do that, cache values contains everything that has been input on any step. For the entity form wizard, it contains a magic key, which is whatever the entity type is you're playing with. We're playing with the path auto pattern, so it has a magic key of path auto pattern. And inside that key is your entity. My second line there in the middle that's all comment is just telling PHP Storm what that entity is so that I can get autocomplete on all the methods, right? So it's 2 lines of functional code in order to get back at the entity. It's really easy, it's really straightforward, and it gives you a ton of power to go from one step to the next and keep all those values around. Any questions? Like, really, I'm just killing time now. You have 1 minute. 5 if I want to take up the time Morton took from me. Okay. Well, with that being said, I'm going to spend more than 1 more minute, and I'm going to show you something cool that uses a bunch of this stuff too. Is everybody okay with that? If you need to leave, feel free to leave.
Doors are locked.
Are the doors locked? That sounds about my style. Okay. I'm going to need Chrome for this. God knows what Chrome will boot up. Okay. Anybody used REST API in Drupal 8 yet? No, 1 person. Okay. 2 people. All right, so it does, wow, I really did not mean that. It does some great things, but I sort of felt like we could maybe do better. And so I'm going to, everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So Kyle Browning is the maintainer of services, and about 4 or 5 weeks ago, Kyle approached me and said, hey, I want to rewrite services for Drupal 8. And I said, hey, so do I. So we started rewriting services for Drupal 8. And we had a ton of fun doing it. And you can see I did a test for Daniel Venner earlier. And so what you're about to see is the result of our work. And this all benefits largely from the plugin API that's in core, and from the context system that's on top of that plugin API, and the routing system in Drupal 8, which is actually really awesome. And if there's one thing I could tell you, you want to be like a super developer for Drupal 8, go learn the routing system. You can get away with so much understanding that system, it's scary. So what we did here was we actually wrote a series of plugins along with derivers, and so there are 10 classes in total, 5 plugins, 1 for index and 1 for get, post, put, and delete. And then there are 5 derivers, 1 for each of them. And with those 10 classes, we got all of these different plugin implementations. This is CRUD for every entity type in all of core. I'm still scrolling. Okay? So with that, I can begin to do some pretty cool stuff. I'm going to do this in my logged in version. So I can come in here and I can do, let's see, you guys probably can't see that, can you? All right, you see that okay? Yeah. Okay, so this is, my service endpoint was called Doug because I was showing the Drupal user group this, and I'm just going to reuse that. And then I'm actually firing the index for all block entities right now. So this is the machine name for every block entity I have in my system. This isn't super useful. I want to do some stuff with this, but we could talk about that later. I can come in here and I can say like, hey, here's block 15. And if I come in, here's block 15's configuration, all of it, right? Okay, that's cool. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to do a put statement back to it. Headers, yep, content type, good. And what I want you to notice is that the region is currently footer first. And now The region is footer second. I just moved a block from one region to another across a services API. Okay?
What?
Yeah. Welcome to the future. Let's go have some more fun. You, oh, yeah, nope, can't do that.
So would this work if you had rules?
Would your rules be available to be altered across the services endpoints?
No. Could you be able to manage your blocks if you had rules enabled this way?
Yeah, so this is basically,
said that rules
because
break
of
down.
visibility settings, if you have rules, you can't use the UI, so you'll have to do something like this.
Oh, yes, you could absolutely fix it this way, I think. I'm not sure, because some of that, I think, is actually the forms problem. So if you were really explicit about what you're doing, I believe the answer is yes. My super useful node index page. So we're going to go to node 5. And you'll see, here's all of node 5's data. All right, cool. Let's prove that we can do this too. So what do I want to do? Let's see, I've got to change this to value. I still don't know why. But that's weird. Whatever. So I'm going to update the title here. Oh, unprocessable entity. Well, as I said earlier, it is alpha software.
Are you sure you're supposed to change that to reference to value?
This?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
What's in your body field?
Huh. We could try, though. Maybe something changed, because I am running RC2 on this, and I haven't tried this since then, so could be. Awesome! Go core! So, I just updated a node. Right? Okay, that's pretty cool. Let's go see something else really cool. Why are you being so slow, Chrome? I don't like that. All right. You won't be able to see this one nearly as well, but I'm going to show it anyways. All right, so here's node 5, and I'm going to do a get call to it. And what I want you to notice is that that took 560 milliseconds. Okay? Typical Drupal. Right? That one took 84 milliseconds. Services is getting cached in the page cache mechanism, just like anything else in Drupal could be.
Yay. Yes.
Want to see something else really cool? What happened? Where did you go? Okay. So I've got that. Let's come back over here and see demo 2. I'm going to hit, this is node 5. I'm going to hit send again. So we're going to update this to say demo 2. All right, cool. So this is still node 5. It was 84 milliseconds. I'm going to hit send. And you'll notice that was 560 milliseconds again because that was a cache miss. I cleared my service endpoints based upon updating an entity across services. What's really cool is that just worked out of the box after like one line of code from me. Drupal 8's really awesome. You're going to love development. Now, I've shown you a lot of really cool stuff. I want to show you one last thing, and then I'll let you go. So we've got block over here. Let's see. I think we were doing that one. All right. Actually, yeah, that's fine because, yeah, good. So here's my block. Everybody keeps talking about headless, headless this, headless that. I'm not so sure I'm convinced about headless, but just in case I'm wrong, I made it so that you can actually render these across the service endpoints. along with all their individual styles and script tags, their cache information is actually already in the headers, so you can inspect the headers to find out what their cache tags and cache context and max ages and everything are. And this one doesn't do the styles and stuff too well, so why don't we go to something that does? That's Node 5, along with every single script and style that applies to it right now. I think core actually has it wrong, and I want to see a much smaller list of things here, but you get the point. I'm actually rendering a node on a service endpoint that's cacheable, and you could do stuff like, I don't know, crazy front-end MVC JavaScript nonsense, all against cached endpoints that could be cached like via Varnish and be super fast. So,
Change the title, you clean the cache.
yep, absolutely. Yeah, you go to Drupal, you update that node, it'll clear that cache, boom. Next hit, 560 milliseconds. So that's what I've got. Those are the sorts of cool things you can do with all the stuff that made it out of CTools and into core. And if you have additional questions, feel free to track me down this week and have a chat with me. Thanks.